Hi guys, as you probably already can tell by the title, gyms in the UK are set to reopen in the next few days. This video is going to look at all the things that you should and should not be doing when you return back to your normal training. But yeah, let's jump straight in. I'm going to jump onto the first tip. Number one, we're going to look at training intensity and training loads. So training intensity is essentially how much effort you give to a certain exercise. Training load is the resistance lifted. So if we look at training intensity and training load, the worst thing that someone could potentially do when they get back into the gym and start their program is to attempt to hit your first 1 rep max. Trying to do that or hit your previous workout numbers only going to impede on your recovery capabilities and increase the likelihood of getting injuries. This is mainly because for the majority of lockdown, most people have trained with limited equipment or less than 40% of their previous 1 rep max. So your body will not be ready or primed to hit such numbers. A better approach could be to make better use of this rebound window that we've been given. So essentially because of muscle memory, and if you've been training prior to lockdown for a considerable amount of time, you can get away with using a small stimulus, so much less weight, which won't hinder recovery capabilities and still lead to adaptation. Essentially that is muscle growth. Instead of trying to hit your 1 rep max, maybe look to train within 50 to 55% of your previous 1 rep max and slowly build up your work capacity over 4 to 5 weeks to a point where you're able to train again at that level of intensity without needing a whole week to recover from your training. Tip number 2, let's look at training volume and training frequency. So during lockdown, most of us had limited amount of equipment, so we're doing very high reps and loads of sets to make up for the lack of weight. Now that our training load or our weight is no longer a limiting factor, there's no need for us to carry on training extremely high volume. If anything, all the additional weights that we're able to now lift, training at that level of volume where we're doing 5, 6, 7, 8 even sets of 20 plus reps is only going to further hinder our recovery capabilities. With the introduction of all the new weight, that's already been very taxing on our recovery. And as we already know, it's not necessary for us to train at a high volume or extremely high intensity or even very high weights for us to regain the lost muscle because of muscle memory. So we might as well get away with doing less and starting at the lower end of the volume scale and building our capacity up. What I personally recommend is to start at the lower end of the volume scale to where we can still elicit hypertrophy and rebuild our lost muscle. So that could be anywhere from 8 to 10 sets per body part per week, depending on the body part and how long we've been training. What we can do is to build up our volume over 5 to 6 weeks, maybe longer, maybe less. That again all depends on how long you've been training for and how your body handles with training volume. And end that period, or look to enter that period, anywhere between 15 to 20 sets. 20 sets per body part per week for the more advanced lifter, someone's been training for a lot longer, and 15 sets or maybe even less for someone that's been training for a shorter period of time. By doing this, it's just going to give our bodies a better chance to adapt to the new intensity that we are training at. It can be advantageous for us to train at a higher frequency alongside using a lower volume approach. So by that I mean, instead of training a body part 1 to 2 times per week, instead we could scale this up to 3 to 4 times per week. I wouldn't really push any more than 4 times per week because again that could potentially impede on our recovery, but this will allow us to reaccustom to our training as well as starting to relearn our body mechanics. Tip number 3, let's take a look at cardio. So I know a lot of people will be eager to lose some of the excess weight that they may have gained over lockdown, and the first thing that people are going to look to do is to jump on some of that hard cardio. But hard cardio just means things like HIIT, so sprinting, skipping, anything that's quite high intensity. The issue of doing this, and while I do not advise doing this during a rebuilding phase or a comeback period, is we want to maximize our body's ability to build muscle. So high intensity interval training is very taxing on our recovery capabilities. If we struggle to recover from our HIIT cardio, we may not be able to push ourselves to the best of our ability in our gym sessions and rebuild some of that lost strength and hit our targeted numbers. So a better approach, and what I'd advise, is for people to manage their expenditure is to simply opt in for more low intensity interval training. So this could be slow walks on a treadmill at a low level, or something like just managing our NEAT, so just walking more. So to aim for something, let's say 10,000 steps a day, will allow us to get a high level expenditure for the overall day and manage our energy balance, just so we can maintain for the current period, for say the first 5 to 6 weeks. And then after that, and our body's adjusted to our training, we can start implementing some of that HIIT cardio back into our routine. Tip number 4, let's look at mobility. So muscle loss and training performance are not the only two things that are taking a hit as a result of the closure of gyms. Similarly, our joints, our connective tissue and our overall body structure would have also gotten weaker over the last 4 months from not being able to lift our usual weights, or just using our usual equipment, or hitting our normal routines. So that being said, a good habit to adopt into your training now that gyms are reopening is to just introduce some mobility work, some post-workout stretching, such prehab work at the start and at the end of your workout. If you're already doing something like this, say you're doing 10 minutes of mobility work at the start of the session, maybe increase it to 20, if not even 30 minutes of mobility work. And this will go a long way into giving your joints, your connective tissue, and your overall body structure a chance to adapt to the back into training, as well as give it a chance to deal with the huge increases in weights. And this will also really help to limit the likelihood of big injuries. If someone was to jump straight back into that training with all those heavy weights, they could see themselves getting injured with stuff like knee injuries, elbow injuries, shoulder injuries, which is the last thing that we need when trying to rebuild lost muscle. Tip number 5, let's look at nutrition. Nutrition should have probably been the first thing I spoke about, as it's very important for us to rebuild muscle during our combat phase. 3 protocols that I'll be looking at is, should we be in a calorie deficit, should we be eating at maintenance, or should we be eating in a calorie surplus? I would personally advise that you eat in the maintenance. Maintenance allows us to get enough food to support our training and allowing us to push and be progressive in our 4 to 6 week combat period. The reason I'd opt out of a calorie deficit, even if you have gained some excess body fat during lockdown, is it's not going to give you enough energy or enough fuel to really push yourselves to rebuild that lost muscle. And as the period is focused on muscle gain, this would be counterintuitive to what we're trying to achieve. Calorie surplus wouldn't necessarily be necessary, as training performance would not yet be at its peak, so all the extra calories may not be best utilized and lead to some maybe excess body fat gain that we don't necessarily want. So I'll probably leave the calorie surplus until after weeks 6, after week 6, maybe sooner if you find yourself training performance has already accelerated back to where it was prior to lockdown, or if not very close. So that's my top 5 tips for rebuilding muscle. Essentially, just don't be silly, start off lighter than you think you need and build yourself up nice and slow over a 4 to 6 week period, and you'll prevent yourself getting any unwanted injuries. You'll be back to where you were before lockdown in no time and making those gains. If there's anything that I did miss, please let me know in the comments, but otherwise don't forget to like and subscribe and watch out for my next video. Bang!